Hi, this is Scott Garibay. And today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and a really solid way to be a better dungeon master, and that is to know when you're preaching. All right, so let's get into this. How do you know when you're preaching, and how do you preach at the right level? Okay? Now, basically, I just watched the movie Twister. It's such a great film. Absolutely love the movie Twister, 1996 Twister film. Really, clearly, just a brilliant film. This movie preaches. So this is a just like stones to the wall action epic disaster film, right? And it's filled with like all kinds of cool stuff, like, oh, there's a cow flying through the air. Let's pick up a semi truck with a tornado, or with a hurricane tornado with a tornado, and full of gas, and slam it on the ground. There's gonna be a giant explosion, right? It's filled with all kinds of cool action that is super easy to watch, just so easy to watch, and it's really, it's very easy movie to watch, except when it's preaching. When does Twister preach, right? Well, it preaches when it says, oh, it's super important that scientists risk their lives to get a solution so that there could be 15-minute warning on a tornado rather than a 3-minute warning on tornado. Because if there's a 15-minute warning, you can evacuate. But if there's a 3-minute warning, you can't evacuate. Your house is just going to get ripped out of the ground, and people are going to die, right? So it gets real preachy, right? Like, so they show, like, Billy and Joe are the two main characters, and they're, and Joe is, she was, her father, like, held the door on their underground shelter and was ripped up by a tornado, and he died because they didn't have enough time to bolt the door, right? And if it had been a 15-minute warning instead of a 3-minute warning, he would have lived, right? Now, when they show her father ripped up into the sky and, he just dies, and his wife and his children see that, right? It's incredibly compelling drama. It's not really preachy, right? Later, when they go to Joe and she's looking forlorn across the field in a tornado, saying nothing, and then everybody else is like, she's really determined to make sure that these tornadoes, that we have a good scientific model of tornadoes so that we can increase the warning time from increase it from 3 minutes to 15 minutes. It's very preachy, right? And the reality is, there's a character in the film who is Bill's new fiance, and she's like, this is crazy. Nobody's life should be lost for a science experiment. And Joe's like, no, it should be stones to the wall, man. Total risk. Scientists should be willing to die. And she's preaching, right? So when you're running your Dungeons and Dragons game, and that's the point, is Twister 1996, they keep it tight. There's like a 2-minute preachy section, then a 1-minute preachy section, then a 2-minute preachy section in a movie that has 110 minutes of content, right? So like less than 5% of the story is preaching, right? So that's the point. And here's why I'm talking about this. Everybody preaches, right? And in the movie Twister, they're preaching, oh, scientists should be willing to risk their lives for the greater good so that more people can escape. And your individual scientist life is not worth the hundreds of lives that they could save if they take more risk. That's preaching, right? And you might have preaching. You might be a vegan and you want to preach, the values of veganism, right? You might be someone who believes in the supernatural and believes in the afterlife. And because of that, you might give more prominence to your clerics, and you might, really, allow your cleric to feel a lot of benefits from being able to supernaturally heal people because of their devotion to a god, right? That's preaching. There's all kinds of ways that you could preach. And here's the issue. It's totally okay to preach in your D&D game, right? It belongs there, but it has to be under 5%, all right? And the other thing is, your preaching has to be less loud than your preaching is your message, right? What is the message you want to get to your players, okay? But your story has a narrative, right? And that narrative is the story of the player characters, the story of the non-player characters, the story of the world, right? And your narrative has to be much, much, much louder than your message. This is the main problem of Hollywood today. They scream their message so loud in almost every single Hollywood movie and show today that you can barely hear the narrative. And I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are frustrated with Hollywood content, right? And it's a great opportunity for good dungeon masters to replace shoddy, like, how many Hollywood movies are like, oh, environmentalism, make sure you eat hummus and drive an electric car. It's in everything, right? Like, and so a Hollywood film that's pro-environmentalism is boring because you just see it all the time, and the message is so loud, right? Whereas the narrative is clearly secondary. But we as DMs have the ability to say, okay, we're going to cap it at 5%. If there's 10 minutes in, if I have 10 minutes of game time, 9 minutes of that are going to be spent on adventure and drama and narrative, and 1 minute can be spent on preaching, right? So know when you are preaching, because it's the greatest. I think it's the greatest problem of Hollywood today. They have no idea when they're preaching, right? Some shows are virtually nothing but preaching, right? So just know when you're preaching and keep it at 5%. That's my opinion. What do you think? What do you think is the appropriate percentage of preaching that could be in your game? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.